Hey, welcome back to the channel. If you haven't done so, why don't you hit the subscribe button for us? It really does help us out. Do you have a Virtual Boy that has dead screens or lines in those screens and it makes it hard to play? Well, chances are the ribbon cable that connects the LCD array to the main board is probably damaged. We had another video, which I'll link up here, and it shows a safe, relatively easy method to get those screens to come back to life. But by request, we've been asked to show the solder method. This isn't for the faint of heart, and it's not for somebody that doesn't have steady hands. But if you stick around, we'll show you how to get it done. Hey, welcome back. On the bench today, we have another Virtual Boy. This one isn't as bad as the last one we worked on. Both eyes are working, but in the left eye, I believe it was the left eye, the owner has said that there was a few lines. And when I checked it, probably about a week ago when it first came into the shop, that's what I saw. Honestly, they were hard to even see or to find. So one of the things was I was using pinball to check it with, and it was just individual missing pixels. And since this one is kind of space oriented, there's a lot of dark areas. But on that note, this is the test cartridge that's sitting here on the bench. For people that are just getting into Virtual Boy, a lot of the Japanese games are completely 100% in English, and they are exactly the same game as the American counterpart. So if you're just getting into Virtual Boy and you want something like Galactic Pinball, I know I paid probably $1 or $2 for this particular one, but it should still be probably half as much as the one with the USA label on it. Just keep that in mind. I think the only one that was really different is the baseball game. All the names are in Kenji or whatever the characters are. So anyway, method we're going to look at today is 1, requested by the owner, and 2, requested by some of my comments on my previous video, which I will link up here. In my first video, we looked at using a 3D printed clamp and using just a heat sealing iron to put the ribbon back on the optical board. And the reason I do that is it's not destructive, and for me, it has been fairly permanent, as long as somebody doesn't get in there and start tinkering with things. My personal Virtual Boy has been running just fine with that method, and it's probably pushing close to 4 years now that I did it. There's a few other methods. The one method that people say is permanent, and I would not disagree, but I'm not going to 100% agree with it, is the solder method. That's where you take the optical board off, and at the bottom of the ribbon, you basically solder each of the connections. Now, that does, if done properly, that does give you a nice, clean, firm connection. And I will admit that when you just heat seal the ribbon back down, there is potential of it coming back up or not making a solid connection. The issue is the ribbon used in these isn't a traditional copper ribbon with a ribbon with copper wire in it. It's more of a composite type copper. So it can crack. So for the people that say that it's absolutely permanent, well, we don't know because nobody has done it and had one sitting around for 30 years again. Now I will say this, if you solder it and use a clamp, there's a good chance it will, because you're never going to flex that part that was soldered. If you don't clamp it in some method, the glue is still going to come up and that ribbon's still going to work back and forth. The one reason why I didn't do a video on it before is because, well, it's not for the faint of heart. You have to mildly destroy the ribbon to get the solder to flow up underneath it and to make the connections. You're going to melt some of the connector. Now, I've actually, over the last few months, had people contact me saying, is this repairable? And, you know, their iron bumped the ribbon halfway up and destroyed the ribbon. And of course, I told them, there's no way to save that ribbon. There's other methods to save the Virtual Boy, but that ribbon was done. Also, if you don't have a nice controlled soldering iron that you can set the temperature and it gets too hot, of course you can melt way too far up the ribbon and destroy it. But I've seen some people with a nice steady hand actually trim off that bit, move it down, and solder. One of these days I'll try to find the aftermarket kit that put a complete new ribbon and a new top of the circuit board on. But I don't even know if those are still in production. So anyway, today we're going to do the solder method. I guess that was the long way to get to that. So we've got our Virtual Boy, and we'll get it apart. And for the people that didn't watch my last video, more or less, you just take the screws out, and it uses a standard game bit. You don't have to take the 4 out of the base if you don't want, but you do need these 2 here. So these ones, the one here and here, and the ones here and here. And then the shell comes apart. And also, as you can see, if you're going to take a Virtual Boy apart, you can't use game bits. You need a driver that can drop down inside and actually get to the screws. There we go. From there, the speakers just drop out, and we can get the optical boards out pretty easy. The ribbons just pull. They give us a nice tab to grab from. And we have I believe a number 10 Torx, which is, yes, we do. And then we have a small Phillips. I believe it needs to be smaller than, I think it's a 0. And your optical board comes out like that. We'll set that aside for a minute. All right, so here's our ribbon. Give us a clean spot to work so we don't get dust all over the optics. And I'm gonna get the microscope out. I'll be right back. All right, so we got the microscope out, and you can see over here, here's our ribbon. And this one's in actually very, very, very good shape. You can see it's not ripped up, it's not broken. And all the traces are in good shape. So we don't have any damage. So at least this is a good candidate to start from. And the ribbon is still attached fairly well. So what we're gonna do, if you see here, you know, this was just kind of a target for them to hit. And these first pins aren't actually even connected to anything. Now this one, it looks like it's not. There's a via right there. And of course it goes to the other side of the board. And it's the same way on this side of the board. You know, you've got a few pins here that aren't really connected. But, you know, you can do the entire thing. And there's our optics close up. And for any of you wondering, this is just a straight line of LEDs that project into the mirror. So this is the array, and the mirror oscillates and scans the image. And of course there's the main board and the servo board that times it all, and it's really a quite interesting setup. So anyway, here we are back to our ribbon. And you know, this is, like I said, this is the solder method. So let's get to soldering. Anytime I solder, we always use flux. So I'm gonna actually put something to weight this down just a little bit so it doesn't move from the microscope. Give something a little bit more weight. There we go. And we're going to come in here and we're going to add some flux right to that joint. Now, the flux does several things. First of all, it etches the surface of the substrate that you're soldering or brazing or whatever. Flux isn't something just for solder. Essentially, you have flux and rosin even in some welding processes. So anyway, so the flux etches the surface and preps it to bond with the solder that we're going to use. And today we're going to actually use 6337 Kessler. It's a little bit more mechanically firm, if that's even such a thing. But it etches, and it also keeps the oxygen away, so we don't get oxidation in a bad solder joint. So we have the soldering iron turned down from our normal levels. A lot of times when we're working on a PlayStation 4 or a Switch, you know, we've got these lead-free solders, and they just take an absolute ton of heat to get anything to move. So you want to make sure your tip is nice and clean, right? So whatever method you like. On my old Weller, I used to like to use the wet sponge. On this, I've been using the brass or the copper, like the Brillo pad, the scouring pad. So now that we have flux there, we can get a little solder right on our tip. And we can just carefully come up and kiss the edge of that ribbon. And you can see how it flows up and into the bottom of the ribbon. But you can also see how we are lightly melting the ribbon away. And that's why I don't care for this method. Because one false move and you've destroyed something we can't replace. Can't replace, sorry. But if you take your time, use good flux, use good solder, it shouldn't be a problem. But if you are unfamiliar with proper soldering techniques, or you don't know if your hand is steady enough, my recommendation is to just avoid this method. Keep your tip clean. If your flux is starting to burn, just go ahead and clean it. And start again. And cleaning flux here is always just 91% IPA. You can see how it kind of, I mean, it already is a yellowish color, but as it burns, it gets dark. And also, since we're melting plastic, we got to make sure the tip stays clean. And once you get that cleaned up, you can get a better inspection. And you can see that all of those connections are bridged, except for maybe those few right there by that top screw. So, a little more flux. Flux is cheap insurance in this process. That looks better. And maybe this one right here. There we go. And more or less, that's it. I know the method shown made it look a little easier than it probably should be. But, I've got a microscope I'm looking at. I'm using 2.5 power readers. And like I've said in some of my other videos, I don't generally use readers to read. I've got a soldering iron with a very, very, very controlled tip. Don't try this with a Radio Shack special. I know Radio Shack's not around anymore really, but do yourself a favor. If you're going to do this, spend a few dollars, buy a soldering iron that you can control that temperature. Just for information, I've got this set for 380 degrees Celsius, which is actually still even a little high for regular leaded solder. What I'm going to do is go ahead and pop off that second one, and I'm going to do it off camera. And we'll reassemble and we'll see if our lines are gone. I'll be right back. All right, we got the other side all soldered up, and I reinstalled them. I guess I should have got that part on camera, but it's just a reverse process. We can see the board went back in, and when you're putting this back in, it does kind of snap into place. There's a couple plastic pins, the 2 small screws and the larger screw, and then push the ribbon in, but make sure you do it from the plastic retainer clip. But you can also see we made sure to have the 3D printed support bracket with a little bit of foam behind it, so that way as this tunnel moves in and out, you can see here, this is what originally caused it to break, is that moving in and out. It's going to clamp that ribbon, and it's going to keep that solder joint from flexing regardless. So the reason I kind of stopped here on my reassembly, I needed to get a controller, and I wanted to show you. I know I've talked about it in my other videos, but I wanted to show you what this is all about. And really how ingenious this whole system was. So, as I was saying before, you know, you have that array, which is just a single line of LEDs. And it's in this tunnel. And you can see these two mirrors here. And they actually move back and forth. That's known as a galvanometer, which is the device that makes old analog meters work. But these have sensors in the back to tell it when it's at one side or another. It's an optical gate with it's an optical trap with a gate in the middle. So when it comes over here, it knows it's open and it comes back. And it oscillates, and that's how it times the image. But I did want to show you, and I'm hoping the camera resolution is enough, but when I turn it on, you can see them start to vibrate. And that's not just a random vibration. It's timed and working together, so the two images make the 3D image in your brain, really, because it's two 2D images. And also, well, let's see if we can get the microscope to pick this up. I don't know if it will or not. We'll see if we... There it is. I guess it's slow enough that it can see it. If we start it, Virtual Boy splash screen. The automatic pause those were added to the games because people were complaining about headaches and strained eyes. So if you leave that on, I believe it was every 15 minutes, it would go into a pause mode. And that's looking pretty good. There's no lines, no issues, no nothing. So I think we got this one handled. And the owner should be happy with that. Like I said, I don't prefer this method. I honestly prefer the iron method. But I've had a lot of people saying, it's not permanent, it's not proper, this is the only way to fix it. So I wanted to show this method. But once again, if you're trying this in your home shop and you're a hobbyist and you don't have a good iron with a nice square, clean tip, I do recommend a chisel for this because if you use a point, you might wind up peeling the, if you use something like this, you might actually wind up peeling the ribbon up. So don't use anything sharp. Try to use a chisel or something with some flat into it. And you know, when you put solder on, you're gonna put the flux on, you just put a tiny dab of solder. And you might only do 3 or 5 of those pins at a time. Clean the tip, reapply solder. You're putting a very, very small amount of solder on all that. So anyway, if you found this video informative, if you liked the video, if you like my content, hey, give us a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button. Ask questions down below in the comments. I try to get to all of them. Some days it gets a little busy, but I always try to come back, even if it takes a few days. Also, as mentioned before, we're an Amazon affiliate now. So things like solder and soldering iron, some of the tools you see here in these videos, they're listed now down below in the description. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you on my next video. Thanks.